The old man, 86 years old, stood quietly in front of a federal building in Texas. He wore a faded, weathered coat, the kind only veterans keep as a reminder of their service. The cold wind cut through the thin fabric, making him shiver. In his hands, he clutched a worn folder full of documents, some pages slipping out and falling to the ground. He didn't bend to pick them up. He just held on tighter to what remained, as if afraid someone might take it away. He was looking for the Veterans Assistance Office, trying to ask about his cut pension. No one helped. No one saw him as a person. When he gently reached out and tapped a security guard on the shoulder to ask for directions, everything changed. 3 uniformed guards rushed him. No questions. No warnings. They shoved him hard, sending him face first onto the stone floor, then kicked him. In the back, in the stomach. One of them growled, "Get out of here, old man." The veteran tried to shield his face. His eyes rolled back from the pain. He didn't scream. His hand reached out, grabbing at the air, like he was back in the trenches, calling for his brothers. But they didn't know. They didn't know someone was watching. And just hours later, that someone would walk to the same front doors and silence the entire building. Because the moment they showed their face, everything changed. And from that day on, America would never look at the story the same way again. His name was Walter Jameson. Born in 1938 in a small town in Arkansas, Walter grew up in a working-class family. His father was a farmer. His mother picked up seasonal jobs whenever she could. In 1955, at just 17 years old, Walter lied about his age to join the United States Marine Corps. The reason was simple. His older brother had enlisted, and Walter wanted to stand beside him on the battlefield. Walter arrived on the Korean Peninsula just a few months after the armistice was signed. There weren't many large battles by then, but during a routine patrol near Incheon, he was hit by a piece of shrapnel that tore into his left leg. Doctors removed most of it, but a small fragment stayed lodged in his muscle, and it would remain with him for life. Back home, Walter didn't stay still for long. When the call came for more troops in Vietnam, he volunteered again. All he said was, "My brothers are still out there." He deployed to some of the harshest places. Khe Sanh Hu, Da Nang. He saw things no man should have to see, blood, smoke, friends dying at his side. But he never spoke much about the war. Walter was the kind of man who carried pain quietly. After Vietnam, he returned to the U.S. and worked as a factory hand at a tractor plant. His wife, Linda, passed away young from cancer. Walter never remarried. He raised their 3 children on his own, never complained, never asked for anything. He woke up early every morning to go to work, came home each night to cook dinner. For Walter, doing right by others was enough. What never changed, not through war, not through loss, was his belief in America, in justice, in decency. He didn't need wealth or recognition. He just needed to believe the country he fought for still stood for something true. That's why, on that cold winter morning, Walter put on his old military coat, gathered his worn pension documents, and walked into a federal building in Texas. All he wanted was to ask why his veteran benefits had been cut. He wasn't demanding anything unreasonable, just a simple answer, a bit of respect, a fair explanation. But what happened next, he never saw coming, because the very place he risked his life to protect turned out to be the place where he was beaten, thrown down, and treated like he didn't matter. And that would wake America up. The footage from the surveillance camera later brought tears to many eyes. In the blurry frame, an elderly man, thin, hunched with white hair, walked slowly into the main lobby of the federal building. That was Mr. Walter Jameson, 86 years old, wearing a worn-out overcoat, clutching a stack of old documents. He looked up, trying to find a sign or a direction, then walked toward a tall, young, heavy-set white security guard. Gently, he tapped the man's shoulder, his voice raspy but polite. "Excuse me, sir. I'm lost. I'm looking for the records intake office." The guard spun around. He didn't respond with a question, a direction, or even a sympathetic glance. Instead, he snapped, loud enough for others nearby to turn their heads. "Don't touch me, old man." And just seconds later, Walter was shoved hard, falling face first onto the cold stone floor. Paper scattered everywhere. Before he could sit up, 2 more guards rushed in. No one asked who he was. No one saw the faded military patch on his coat. To them, he was just a disturbance, a problem to be handled. They forced him down. One of them kicked him in the side. Another pulled out a baton, pressed it into Walter's back, and growled, "Shut up, you old freak." Walter didn't fight back. He didn't scream. He only lifted one trembling hand, as if to say, "I mean no harm." But no one cared. None of them knew he'd taken shrapnel in Incheon, that he'd survived firefights in Hue, that he once carried a wounded brother in arms for 2 miles under fire. None of that mattered now, not to them. People in the lobby saw everything. Some paused. Some even pulled out their phones. But no one stepped forward. No one intervened. They turned away as if watching an old man being beaten was just another unfortunate thing that happens in the world. A middle-aged man whispered to his wife, "Probably some homeless guy starting trouble." Minutes later, local police arrived, but they didn't ask who was right or wrong. They didn't look at any records. They didn't question why an elderly man was lying face down on the floor. They simply took the guard's word for it, that he was disruptive, aggressive, a threat to security. And so, Mr. Walter Jameson, veteran, wounded soldier, father of 3, a man who once carried the American flag through mud and fire, was handcuffed. His frail hands trembled behind his back. His old overcoat was stained with dirt, and blood seeped from the old wound in his leg. They led him away like a criminal. No one looked back. No one said sorry. All that remained was a scattered paperwork, lying across the lobby floor, stepped on by indifferent shoes. Just a few hours after Mr. Walter was taken into police custody, a sleek black SUV pulled up in front of the station. There were no sirens, no loud announcements, but all eyes turned toward the vehicle. The door opened, and out stepped a man in full military dress uniform. He was tall, broad-shouldered, every step purposeful and commanding. His eyes were cold steel, his silver hair neatly trimmed, and every line on his face spoke of leadership and resolve. On his chest were rows of medals, most notably the Purple Heart and the Silver Star. No one questioned who he was. This was General John Harper, retired commander of the United States Army, who had led tens of thousands of troops across the Middle East. And now, he had returned, not as a general, but as the blood relative of the man in that holding cell. Mr. Walter was his uncle. The moment he learned what had happened, General Harper canceled his schedule in Washington and flew straight to Texas. With him came a team of military attorneys, media consultants, and a Veterans Affairs advisor. He did not call a press conference. He did not posture for attention. He simply walked into the police station, eyes forward, voice calm but commanding. He knocked once on the door to the holding room, entered, and placed a stack of documents on the desk in front of the police chief. They were official records, medical files, military service reports, and citations for valor, stamped and sealed by the Department of Defense. Then he looked the police chief square in the eyes and said slowly, firmly, "He once saved 4 young soldiers in a trench in 1967. One of them was my father. If America allows a man like him to be beaten, humiliated, right here, inside the very institutions he fought to protect, then we are no longer worthy of the flag we carry." The room went silent. No one spoke. No one dared look away. Minutes later, Mr. Walter was released. He emerged unsteady, his face still bruised, his leg aching from an old injury flared up again. But he was no longer alone. He was supported by the very boy he once bounced on his knee, now a seasoned general. Standing tall beside him, eyes filled with both sorrow and pride. That very night, the surveillance footage leaked online. The moment Mr. Walter was shoved, struck, cursed, and pinned by security guards spread like wildfire. Over 10 million views in under 24 hours. National television played the clip on repeat. An 86-year-old veteran, frail but dignified, being slammed to the ground in silence with a baton. The public outcry was immediate. Thousands gathered in front of the government building, waving American flags and holding signs that read, "Veterans are not the enemy. We don't forget who fought for us." The crowd was diverse, young and old, veterans, teachers, former police officers, all united. This wasn't about politics. This was about principle. Within 24 hours, 3 security officers were suspended. The police chief issued a public apology. A federal investigation was opened, involving the Department of Veterans Affairs and congressional oversight. The press called it a slap in the face to American justice. It became a case study in what happens when society forgets the quiet sacrifices of its protectors. But it was also a reminder that justice can still be stirred. When people like General Harper stand up, when hearts across the country still burn with the belief that right is right. The next morning, Mr. Walter awoke in his modest home. His bruises were healing. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. But more than anything, he noticed a flag folded on the table beside him. A clean, crisp American flag, neatly shaped into a triangle. General Harper had placed it there without saying a word. No ceremony, no speech. But in Mr. Walter's eyes, something changed. Something softened. Something shone. Because for the first time in a very long time, he wasn't just an old man lost in the crowd. He was remembered. He was honored. And above all, he was still, at heart, a soldier. Walter was taken to the Veterans Hospital, where he had quietly volunteered for years. It was the same place where he once spent his weekends reading books to young soldiers battling PTSD, sitting by their beds, telling them stories about old wars and the meaning of endurance. Now, he wasn't a storyteller. He was a patient. Though his body still bore bruises, his spirit remained calm. When a young doctor gently asked if he was angry, Walter shook his head and softly replied, "I'm not angry. I'm just sad. Maybe America has forgotten who we used to be." That single line spread like wildfire. It was quoted in headlines, repeated in speeches, printed on signs held high by veterans across the country. Letters poured into the hospital. Hundreds of them. From soldiers who had served beside Walter, from young people who had just learned his story. Some remembered the trench where he dragged men out under gunfire. Others had never met him, but called him a hero. 2 weeks later, a formal ceremony was held at the United States Senate. The president, high-ranking generals, and hundreds of veterans gathered in solemn respect. Cameras rolled as Walter, in a modest suit and leaning on a cane, slowly walked up to the podium. There, he was awarded the Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor, a tribute not just for his service in battle, but for the dignity he carried even when the nation failed him. The federal government issued an official apology. One senator, her voice steady but emotional, addressed the chamber. "Today, we don't just honor a man. We say we're sorry for what happened to him, and for every moment justice was delayed for someone like him." General John Harper also stood before Congress. His voice echoed through the chamber as he said, "If we cannot show respect to those who gave everything for this country, then America's future will be one without a soul." His words rang like a bell, striking deep. As for the 3 guards who assaulted Walter, they were not spared. After a federal investigation, all 3 were indicted for assaulting an elderly veteran. None of them would work in public service again. But perhaps the most lasting impact wasn't the punishment. It was the change that followed. Months later, Congress passed a new law named in Walter's honor, the Walter Act. The law mandated that all security personnel working in government buildings at every level undergo specialized training in how to interact with elderly citizens and veterans. Every new hire would now hear Walter's story, not as a warning, but as a lesson in human dignity. And so, from pain came purpose. From injustice, a lasting reform. And from one quiet man with a battered body but an unbroken spirit, came a reminder to a nation. Respect is not optional. It is the foundation of everything we are. Sometimes, history isn't written by generals, but by old men who quietly rise to defend their dignity, like Walter Jameson. If you still believe kindness exists in this world, please share this story. Let no one forget, every veteran is a piece of America's soul. Subscribe to Old Soldier Story to hear more true, heart-touching stories, shared once a week. Because sacrifices like his deserve to be heard. United States.